Today, we are opening up a novel that's nearly a century old. It's by, well, arguably the most influential American stylist of the 20th century, Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms.
We've been completely immersed in the sources on this one.
Right. We've been focused on the author's defining trauma, the novel's unflinching structure, and its, frankly, devastating philosophical core.
So our mission today is really to pull out the essential insights. This isn't just a sad love story set during a war.
No, not at all.
It's more like a manual for surviving a world that promises you order and meaning and reward, but what it delivers is, well, it's just mechanical chaos and random loss.
So for you, the listener, if you're looking for a way to understand the lost generation, not as, a historical footnote, but as a blueprint for modern disillusionment, this is the deep dive for you.
Okay, let's get right into it. What's the single insight that makes this book feel so shockingly relevant today?
It's not the war, it's not even the romance, really.
No, it's something deeper.
Here's the one-sentence hook that, for me, just captures the brutal power of this book. A Farewell to Arms predicted modern society in these uncanny ways by just brutally proving that love does not conquer all and that the universe is utterly indifferent to human suffering.
And what's so fascinating here, what our sources really emphasize, is the sheer agonizing struggle Hemingway went through to make sure the reader got that truth, completely unfiltered.
We're talking about the ending.
The ending, the emotional core of the entire book, those last few pages. He revised them, scrapped them, rewrote them 47 separate times.
47 times. I mean, that number just speaks volumes, doesn't it? It shows this incredible artistic integrity, but also the internal fight he was having. He was absolutely determined not to betray his own premise. He refused to tell readers that comfortable lie that, love saves you.
Or that courage protects you.
Or that being a good person means you'll be rewarded. He just wouldn't do it.
And think about that resistance in the context of our own culture. I mean, our high expectations culture.
Oh, absolutely. We're constantly sold this myth that if you just work hard enough, find the perfect relationship, use sheer force of will, you can guarantee control and meaning.
We curate our lives online to show that, to build this narrative where every setback has a neat little silver lining.
And Farewell to Arms just exposes that deeply ingrained expectation as a total heartbreaking lie.
Yeah.
Which is exactly why its message of random, unmerited loss just hits so hard right now.
It strips away all the comforting stories we tell ourselves. But before we get into that crushing philosophy and the trauma that, well, birthed it, let's just quickly set up the story itself.
Good idea. A quick recap for anyone who needs it.
You can break it down pretty easily by the geography.
Yeah, the geography and the psychological state of the characters really map onto each other.
So starting with the setup, the non-spoiler version, the setting is the Italian front during World War I.
Specifically, the later, more brutal years, 1917 to 1918.
Right, and we start in these harsh, rain-soaked, often just dull, mountainous regions of the front. Then we move to the, comparative ease of a hospital in Milan.
And then finally, the escape to the sterile, snow-covered safety of neutral Switzerland.
Our protagonist is Frederic Henry.
He's an American volunteer, a young, kind of passive lieutenant serving as an ambulance driver for the Italian army.
And the key thing about Frederic right away is his detachment.
Exactly. He's not there for some big ideological reason. He's just seeking experience, adventure. He's an observer.
He's treating the war almost like what we'd now call dark tourism.
That's a great way to put it. Close enough to feel the thrill of danger, but not really emotionally invested in the slaughter.
Then we meet Catherine Barkley.
She's a British VAD nurse, a voluntary aid detachment nurse, and she's presented as beautiful, desirable, but the sources are so clear that she is profoundly damaged before she even shows up.
Right. She's dealing with the brutal recent loss of her fiancé.
Blown to bits at the Somme, reportedly. So she came to Italy basically to escape, to just find some kind of function in all the chaos.
And the whole story really gets going when Frederic and Catherine meet.
Right. Frederic, who's bored and detached, starts what he sees as this cynical, almost transactional flirtation just to pass the time.
And Catherine sees right through it.
Immediately. She tells him, "This is a rotten game we play, isn't it?" But she plays along anyway.
Why do you think she does?
Well, because the war creates this absolute vacuum of connection. In that desperate chaos, you just crave human intimacy, even if you know it's starting as a lie.
And that's the crucial turn, isn't it? The cynical game gradually, almost by accident, becomes a real passionate love affair.
It does. They start building this private world, Small domestic moments, shared rooms, wine, conversations. It's this tiny, fragile world for two people inside this giant industrial machine of war.
They're trying to create their own separate meaning because the institutional meaning, patriotism, duty, it's all just evaporated.
And that desire for a private peace is exactly why the rest of the story is so devastating.
Okay, so this is your warning. If you haven't read the novel, we are now moving into the core, spoiler-heavy tragedy of the book.
So Frederic is wounded, a life-altering injury that lands him in that hospital in Milan.
An injury that, by the way, mirrors Hemingway's own trauma almost exactly. We'll get to that.
And it's during his recovery there that the love between him and Catherine really solidifies. They have this brief period of intense, almost suffocating happiness.
But the war is never far away.
Never. Frederic has to return to the front lines, and he's immediately caught in this catastrophe known as the Great Disaster, the Italian retreat from Caporetto.
And this is one of the most famous, most harrowing sequences in all of 20th century literature.
It was a real event, a complete military and moral breakdown in October 1917. When the Austro-Hungarians and Germans attacked, the Italian Second Army just dissolved.
And Hemingway captures it not like a battle, but like a psychological collapse.
Exactly. It's all exhaustion, sheer chaos, and this unending mud and rain. The sources mention that over 300,000 Italian soldiers were lost, killed, wounded, or captured in just 2 weeks.
Total disintegration.
And the key here is the psychological environment. Frederic is stuck in this traffic jam of ambulances and deserters. This is where we see the absolute evaporation of any kind of military discipline or civic order.
Right. And it all culminates in that horrifying sequence where Frederic, just trying to keep his convoy moving in the mud, gets involved in a lethal incident with an Italian sergeant who won't follow orders.
It's a critical scene because Hemingway strips away all moral judgment.
He does.
He just depicts the cold, brutal necessity of survival under anarchy. The normal rules are gone, an officer is fatal to a man for disobedience in the mud, and the story just moves on.
And the rain just keeps falling.
It's this symbol of nature's absolute indifference to all this human violence.
And that moral chaos leads directly to the pivotal moment of the whole book, the separate peace.
Right. Frederic runs into these military police who've set up a makeshift execution court. They're just lining up and killing Italian officers they suspect of desertion. No trial, no evidence.
And Frederic realizes he's next.
In this terrifying, instinctive act of self-preservation, he just breaks away and dives into the Tagliamento River.
That dive is the farewell to arms, his desertion.
It is. But it's more profound than that. It's him withdrawing his consent from the war's claim on him. He's stripping off the uniform that nearly got him killed.
And now his only loyalty, his only meaning, is Catherine.
That's it. The escape is immediate and desperate. He and Catherine reunite in Milan, and they start this grueling, physically punishing journey, rowing 35 kilometers across Lake Maggiore to get to neutral Switzerland.
And they make it. They find this temporary, fragile safety, settling in a quiet hotel in Montreux. It's all quiet and snow.
But that psychological shadow is still there. Even in all that safety, Catherine is plagued by this mounting, seemingly irrational fear of the rain. She says she sees herself dying in it.
And that premonition just hangs over their little domestic bubble like a storm cloud.
It does. Frederic tries to reassure her, but the words feel hollow. Because you can't outrun the deep forces of fate, the same forces that caused the war, even in a neutral Swiss hotel.
And then the climax arrives in Lausanne.
Catherine goes into a very difficult, very long labor at a modern hospital. And in this moment of just devastating, almost mechanistic irony, the baby is fatally wounded.
Strangled by its own umbilical cord.
The very thing meant to give life becomes the instrument of destruction. And then Catherine begins to hemorrhage, and she dies.
This whole sequence, written with this breathtaking, devastating restraint, is the entire philosophical payoff of the novel.
It is. The most profound human experience, childbirth, the continuation of life is what destroys her. Not some spectacular external event like a shell, but biology itself.
The universe doesn't need to send armies to break you.
Nature is sufficient.
And Frederick's final observation, with no melodrama at all, is the ultimate statement of devastation. He says saying goodbye to her body is like addressing a statue.
It signifies this total emotional numbness, this profound irreparable loss. And he just walks away alone, back into the persistent, indifferent rain, proving that love, courage, virtue, they offer absolutely no shield from mechanical, biological fate.
That ending is what those 47 rewrites were all about, that refusal to provide any comfort.
Exactly. And to really appreciate that level of artistic honesty, you have to look directly at the man who wrote it.
A Farewell to Arms is this remarkable work of synthesizing profoundly personal trauma into a universal, cold, hard truth.
So let's transition now to the man behind the book, Ernest Hemingway. His early life really set the stage for this specific code of stoicism he would later try to live by and write about.
Born in 1899, Oak Park, Illinois. His dad was a doctor, his mom a music teacher. He grew up with this deep, almost mythic attachment to nature, hunting and fishing in northern Michigan.
And our sources say that's where he forged that quintessential code of masculine stoicism. The idea that you have to face pain and fear with dignity, and usually in silence.
But the moment he tried to apply that to the biggest conflict of his time, World War I, he got rejected.
Right, desperate to join, but turned away by the Army and Navy because of a childhood boxing injury, a permanently damaged left eye.
Imagine that. He had all the enthusiasm for war, but not the, quote, physical ability, a humiliation he never forgot.
So he found a way around it. He joined the Red Cross as an 18-year-old ambulance driver in May 1918 and shipped off to Europe.
But he wasn't content with safe duty.
Not at all. He immediately volunteered for the most dangerous assignments he could find, running a mobile canteen, delivering supplies to soldiers in the trenches on the Italian front. He was actively seeking the experience of combat.
And that experience found him hard.
On the night of July 8, 1918, at this small village, Fasalta di Piave, he was in a forward trench when an Austrian mortar shell exploded just 10 feet away.
The blast instantly killed the soldier next to him, and it embedded over 200 pieces of shrapnel into Hemingway's legs.
200. An unimaginable physical wound, shattered kneecaps, massive blood loss. But the psychological wound was maybe even more defining.
Right. Despite his injuries, he showed incredible bravery. He carried another fatally wounded soldier to safety before he finally collapsed.
But the psychological fallout was the real fuel for his writing. He later said he felt his soul literally leave his body at the moment of impact.
Think about that. The soul leaving the body. It's the ultimate sense of detachment, of seeing your own trauma from the outside.
And that moment at Fasalta di Piave became the direct, unadorned template for Frederic Henry's wounding in the novel. He just channeled that confusion, the flash, the noise, the sudden end of reality directly into the text.
That authenticity about trauma is why the novel is so powerful. But the art needs more than just physical pain. It needs the transformation of heartbreak.
Which brings us to Milan. He was evacuated to a Red Cross hospital there, which is where the romantic tragedy that shaped the story really takes place.
He met Agnes von Kurowski,
A sophisticated, independent, 26-year-old nurse from Washington, D.C. She was 7 years older than him.
and Hemingway, this wounded, very romantic 18-year-old, just falls desperately in love. They even talked about marriage during that intense summer of his recovery.
It sounds like the perfect wartime romance, doesn't it? Wounded hero finds solace with a compassionate nurse.
But the story ends with a cold dose of indifference that just mirrored the war itself.
Right. When he gets back to America in January 1919, Agnes breaks off the engagement.
Yeah.
In a letter.
A letter.
She had fallen for an Italian officer while he was gone.
So Hemingway was doubly traumatized. He's reeling from the shrapnel. And now, from this betrayal, the destruction of his belief in the transformative power of love.
The sources describe his agony. It was a dual trauma that destroyed his body and his worldview at the same time.
And he didn't write about it right away.
No, it took him almost 10 years to transform that raw personal pain into the controlled, detached art of A Farewell to Arms. He started writing in 1928, channeling it all.
His wounding at Fasalta becomes Fredric's injury.
And Agnes's rejection becomes the tragic, unmerited loss of Catherine in Lausanne.
That's a critical distinction. It wasn't just revenge.
No, absolutely not. If he had just written a memoir about Agnes, it would have been a story of personal rejection. But by creating Catherine Barkley and then having her die not from the war, but from the mechanical failure of her own body, he transformed a personal betrayal into a philosophical statement.
Wait, that's a really powerful point. Say more about that. What does fictionalizing Agnes as Catherine let him do philosophically?
It lets him universalize the cruelty. Agnes's rejection, as painful as it was a choice. It was an action taken by a person.
Okay.
Catherine's death, though, is arbitrary, impersonal, and unavoidable. By having her die in childbirth, the ultimate failure of nature's promise, Hemingway, proves that the problem isn't just human betrayal. The problem is the fundamental, structural cruelty of existence.
So the world doesn't care enough to betray you.
It just breaks you.
Wow. That shift from personal complaint to cosmic indifference is the genius of the novel. And you have to place it in its proper historical setting, because this book is a critical response to the overwhelming disillusionment of the post-WWI era.
Which brings us to the historical and cultural context, the lost generation.
Right. The novel was written a decade after the war ended, which was enough time for the full, horrific societal realization to sink in. They weren't just mourning the dead, they were mourning the entire pre-war belief system.
The Great War was an ideological catastrophe. Industrialized slaughter tanks, machine guns, poison gas. It invalidated all the romantic ideals of the 19th century. Chivalry, noble sacrifice, patriotism.
The generation that survived that carnage couldn't believe the romantic lives that had been used to send millions to their deaths.
And this trauma fueled a literary revolution. Hemingway was writing in 1920s Paris, the epicenter of that cultural upheaval.
And Gertrude Stein, a key figure in that expatriate scene, she coined the term the lost generation for these American writers. Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ezra Pound, James Joyce, who had left America because they felt spiritually unmoored.
They were lost not because they lacked direction, but because the traditional signposts of meaning, religion, flag, family honor had been violently ripped away.
So they rejected traditional literary forms, that ornate Victorian prose, because those forms seemed totally incapable of telling the raw, ugly truth of what they had just seen.
Their shared artistic goal was radical, to write with unflinching, distilled honesty, to strip away all sentimentality and report the brutal reality of survival.
And Hemingway's commitment to that kind of accuracy is what made his novel so groundbreaking when it was published in 1929. I mean, his depiction of the retreat from Caporetto wasn't just made up.
No, it was meticulous historical reconstruction. He did extensive research, interviewed Italian veterans, pored over military reports. He captured not just the physical reality, the logistics, the rain, the casualties, but the moral disintegration.
The novel showed that the real enemy was no longer just the Austrians across the line.
The enemy was administrative incompetence, paralyzing fear, and the machinery of war itself, which turned officers into targets for execution by their own side.
That recognition that the institution itself was actively trying to destroy its own people, that was profoundly revolutionary. And it helped cement his status as the authentic voice of the disillusioned.
So if the context is the destruction of old ideals, then the themes of the book are about what's left when nothing replaces them.
Let's drill down into that philosophical core, indifference and endurance.
This is the absolute heart of the novel and why it's still so powerful. The core philosophy is laid bare in one of Frederic Henry's bleakest, most resonant observations.
The world breaks everyone, and it kills the very good and the very gentle and the very brave impartially.
That statement is just. It's utterly relentless. Hemingway is not interested in comforting cliches. The novel explicitly rejects the idea that suffering teaches you a valuable lesson or makes you a better person.
Loss is just a simple, brutal, and entirely arbitrary fact of existence, like a random piece of shrapnel or a sudden downpour.
And you see that indifference on 3 levels in the book. First, there's bureaucratic indifference, the army executing its own officers.
Second, natural indifference, that endless, impartial rain that falls on everyone, good and bad.
And third, the ultimate climax of biological indifference, Catherine's death in childbirth.
Right. She dies at the exact moment she and Frederic have successfully created their private, loving world away from the war.
Her death proves that nature and biology do not care about human love or planning or who deserves what. The machine of the body just fails at the most critical moment. It demonstrates a mechanistic cruelty that dwarfs the cruelty of man.
It's a masterful piece of writing because it refuses the lie of purpose. It's random, arbitrary, and cold. And this lack of inherent meaning forces the central action of the title, the farewell to illusions.
Absolutely. The title means so much more than just a farewell to arms, as in weapons or war.
It's a profound, total renunciation of every illusion that humanity relies on for comfort and control.
Frederic gives up the illusion that patriotism is noble, the illusion that belonging to the army offers protection.
And the big romantic illusion that finding the one will somehow save you from the outside world.
It's a total spiritual desertion, mirroring his physical desertion at the river. Hemingway strips away everything until only the bare, painful truth is left.
And the pain itself is the end of the line. There's no hidden spiritual reward or cosmic plan waiting around the corner.
And if you can accept that cold truth, then maybe you can survive.
So if the world breaks everyone and all the illusions are gone, what's left? What's the takeaway?
Hemingway suggests that the only heroism possible is simply enduring, facing the truth without flinching, and loving even with the certainty of eventual loss.
This is where we see the Hemingway code hero start to emerge. Not the grand, chivalrous knight of old stories.
No, it's the person who maintains grace under pressure. Frederic Henry is a hero because he survives his injury. He survives Caporetto, and he just keeps walking after Catherine's death.
Endurance becomes its own form of moral dignity.
He doesn't become wise or find enlightenment. He just keeps walking away from the statue of his dead love, alone in the rain. That unflinching acceptance of loss, the sheer necessity of survival, that is the only dignity left. It's the ultimate lesson in radical acceptance.
To understand how he gets these huge, bleak ideas across with such power, we really have to look at his characters. They're not just people, they're like philosophical tools.
Exactly. Each one represents a different reaction to this meaningless world.
So let's start with Frederic Henry, the detached observer and eventually the survivor. Initially, he's just there for the experience, which leads to that emotional detachment. He's a spectator, a war tourist.
But his trajectory shows a profound change. His wounding physically shatters his body, forcing him to rely on others.
And his love for Catherine shatters his emotional cynicism, forcing him toward vulnerability and real commitment. The cynical player becomes a devoted man.
And the pivotal moment of this transformation is his separate piece.
Diving into the river.
That's the moment he sheds the identity of the soldier, the detached observer, and chooses his loyalty. He chooses love over country, individual meaning over institutional meaning. It's a truly heroic act of separation in a world demands conformity.
Then there's Catherine Barkley, the tragic figure who basically embodies pre-existing war trauma.
Right. She is already fundamentally wounded by the Somme before Frederick even shows up. And that initial loss just colors her entire existence, making her vulnerable but also profoundly cynical.
Her first interaction with Frederick is that rotten game, which is born out of vulnerability and a desperate need to feel something, anything, to fill the void.
She even tries to find control through submission, trying to mold herself completely to Frederick's desires, maybe because the outside world felt so wildly out of control.
And we have to talk more about the shadow of the rain.
Yes. Her constant, almost paralyzing fear of the rain, that premonition that she will die in it, is crucial.
It serves as this potent, tragic foreshadowing. It suggests that fate cannot be outrun no matter how far you row or how neutral the country you hide in.
The rain is the symbol of the inevitable, indifferent flow of fate that washes away all human hope and effort.
And Frederick is caught between two extremes, represented by his friends of the front.
The two poles of philosophy in the book. On one side, you have Rinaldi, the brilliant surgeon.
Rinaldi represents pure nihilism and hedonism.
He drinks heavily to deal with the horrors he sees every day, aggressively pursues women, and believes in nothing but his own skill, his hands, and immediate pleasure.
He's a survival strategy based on forgetting.
On the other side is the priest. He represents the spiritual possibility, the chance for genuine goodness, simple love, and faith, even when surrounded by the most horrific carnage. He's the moral anchor.
And the novel sets up this incredible tension. Frederick is constantly caught between Rinaldi's hard-boiled cynicism, which the brutality of Caporetto keeps proving right, and the priest's genuine, simple belief, which his love for Catherine seems to prove right.
And the story asks which path is viable for survival. And heartbreakingly, it shows that neither total faith nor total cynicism can ultimately protect you from the random forces of the universe.
Okay, we have to move on to the sheer literary genius of how Hemingway gets these ideas across. The philosophy is dark, but the revolutionary writing style is what makes the book a masterpiece.
We can call this the aesthetics of trauma. Hemingway believed absolutely that after experiencing the intense trauma of modern industrial warfare, the roar, the flash, the mechanical carnage, that traditional flowery language and elaborate metaphors feel obscene.
That word is so powerful, obscene. He felt that elaborate prose was a form of lying, that it was incapable of reflecting the raw, ugly, fragmented truth of modern life.
Using adjectives and adverbs was to him a kind of moral failure.
So his style is surgically defined by short, declarative, stripped-down sentences. He eliminates all unnecessary ornament. The goal was just to tell the truth, as plainly as possible.
When you read a passage, it feels flat, factual, almost journalistic. But that very flatness is what gives the emotional blow such incredible, delayed power.
And this leads directly to his signature technique, the famous iceberg theory.
Right, which is the literary equivalent of his philosophy of indifference.
The iceberg theory suggests that the writer should only show what's visible actions, concrete dialogue, simple facts.
He believed that for every visible part of the story, there are 7/8 of meaning, context, and emotion hidden beneath the surface.
Yeah.
The author provides the facts. You, the reader, provide the devastation.
It's a huge shift from previous eras. Hemingway never tells you Frederic was devastated.
No, he lets you infer it. Like in the hospital, Frederick asks a nurse for a blanket. That simple action, asking for a blanket, has to carry the weight of unimaginable coldness and despair. It's all about the power of inference.
And the ending's powerful restraint is the perfect example. That final line describing Catherine's body as being like addressing a statue.
Perfect example. He doesn't give us melodrama. He doesn't give us some internal monologue about God or meaning. He provides only a physical, external observation. A corpse looks like a statue.
And that understatement forces the reader to fill in the 7/8 of screaming grief and emotional numbness that Frederic can't express.
That's the key. The style forces you, the reader, to become an active participant in building the emotional reality. It respects you enough to let you feel the raw emotion, rather than lecturing you on how to feel.
And a crucial part of this minimalist style is his use of motif and symbolism, especially the rain. It's so much more than just weather.
It's an atmosphere of inescapable doom that just permeates the entire story. It's a constant, indifferent presence.
The rain is relentless. It's there in the opening. It's there during the retreat from Caporetto, turning the roads into rivers of mud, reflecting the physical and moral chaos.
And Catherine fears it constantly, sensing her end in it. The rain acts as the ultimate symbol of the world's impartiality. It's this unstoppable, indifferent natural force that washes away human effort, love, everything. It makes no distinction.
It just falls, a symbol of unavoidable fate that you can't reason with or control.
So a story like that, one that uses rain as a metaphor for basically godlessness, was bound to cause a stir.
Let's look at how the world reacted to this uncompromising book when it landed in 1929.
The shock of 1929 was immediate. The bleakness of it, the unmerited death, the lack of spiritual comfort, the anti-hero who deserts it, shocked and appalled a lot of established critics.
They were used to, or frankly wanted, some kind of redemption or moral guidance in their literature.
So some critics just flatly labeled it nihilistic, despairing, and morbid. They were profoundly uncomfortable with the unvarnished reality Hemingway presented. They thought art should elevate or console, not just report a catastrophe.
The book was even briefly banned in Boston for its depiction of sexuality and its perceived lack of moralizing.
But while those critics recoiled, the generation that had actually lived through the horrors of WWI recognized its absolute, unflinching truth. They understood that the brutality Hemingway described wasn't an exaggeration. He was writing their specific, shattered reality.
And that recognition led to immediate and massive commercial success. A Farewell to Arms became an instant bestseller.
It established Hemingway as a major literary figure, cementing his place as the authentic, if deeply disillusioned, voice of the era.
And its influence is just undeniable. It's never been out of print, it's been translated into dozens of languages, and It Stands with the Sun also rises as a foundational masterpiece of the 20th century.
It became a permanent monument to the lost generation's disillusionment. But its sustained success, why we're talking about it today, is because of its universal exploration of facing catastrophic loss and finding dignity or just survival in a world with no guarantees.
That struggle against cosmic randomness is timeless, especially now when we're constantly sold the illusion of control.
And this novel fundamentally shaped modern writing. Its influence and legacy go way beyond its initial moment.
Generations of writers who came after, from hard-boiled detective writers in the 30s and 40s to minimalists like Raymond Carver, they all adopted Hemingway's stripped-down, economical approach to capture raw, authentic, emotional truth.
He proved that paring away language actually makes the feeling sharper, not duller.
And the endurance of the themes is just paramount. The central struggle, how do you keep going when everything you love is violently or arbitrarily taken away? That is the template for every great story of grief and survival that came after.
But the legacy is tragically amplified when we look at the author's dark personal parallel.
Right. Hemingway himself never really healed at the broken places. He originated the code hero, the man who stands strong against the void, but he failed to live up to that code himself.
The sources confirm he had debilitating nightmares about Fossalta for 40 years. He desperately sought stability through 4 marriages, intense drinking, the performance of this hyper-masculine stoicism.
But the internal structure he created in his art was one he couldn't maintain in his own life.
That distinction is haunting. The writer who was so determined to prove that endurance was the only grace finally found that endurance was not enough to save him from himself. He ultimately succumbed to his own trauma, taking his own life in 1961.
And this personal end just tragically reinforces the novel's bleak philosophy. The world breaks everyone. And sometimes, even the strong, even the brilliant, do not heal at the broken places.
The art survives. It offers a roadmap for facing inevitable loss. But the man who drew the map couldn't navigate his way out.
The novel's influence also, it extended into other media. There were several film adaptations.
Right, the 1932 version with Gary Cooper, the 1957 one with Rock Hudson, but none of them really captured the novel's emotional restraint.
Why do you think that is?
The cinematic form struggles with the iceberg theory. It demands external action, visible emotional display, which are the exact things Hemingway subverts. The films often turn the final scene into high melodrama, which is what he explicitly avoided.
So the book's power lies in that internal, quiet devastation, not in some big cinematic weeping scene.
Exactly. The adaptations just underscore how truly revolutionary and resistant to easy translation Hemingway's style remains.
Which brings us to our personal reflections and key takeaways. After immersing ourselves in all of this, the trauma, the context, the style, what struck you most powerfully?
For me, it has to be the agony of the creative process, those 47 endings. That level of artistic agonizing to find the precise, unforgiving truth, to refuse the cheap consolation, that's the highest form of integrity.
He could have easily written a happy ending.
Easily. An ending where Frederic and Catherine survive and live happily ever after in Switzerland, it would have been a massive bestseller.
I agree, and that dedication to anti-consolation makes so much sense. It connects directly to my biggest takeaway, which is how surgically he transformed private pain into universal fate.
How so?
I'm just struck by the fact that he used Catherine's death not just as a tragedy, but as a scientific proof. It's not a moment of passion or fury. It's a failure of plumbing, of biology. It makes the loss feel absolutely universal, not personal.
So if you, our listener, choose to read A Farewell to Arms after this, you have to approach it with a specific mindset.
Pay attention to the silence and the simple facts. Don't look for the big emotional monologue because it's not there. The emotional weight is found entirely in what Hemingway doesn't tell you, in the gaps between the sentences.
Right. When a character says it was a good town, you have to ask yourself what 7/8 of desperation and fear is hiding under that plain statement.
And remember the context of WWI. This is not a classic romance novel. It is a profound critique of the grand, comforting narratives of the 19th century. The story proves that ideas of sacrifice, honor, and destiny were shattered by modern, impersonal, mechanistic warfare.
And finally, who should read this book today?
Anyone who feels broken or disillusioned by those comforting cliches that promise guaranteed rewards. Anyone who needs to know they're not alone in feeling that life's losses are often random and unfair.
It's a book for anyone who appreciates literary craft and values raw, honest truth over comfortable consolation.
Because that truth, however painful, is fundamentally necessary for facing the world as it actually is.
A Farewell to Arms is about finding dignity in the fact that you just keep walking, even when the loss is total and there is nowhere left to go.
That unflinching acceptance, that commitment to honesty, is the profound lesson of Hemingway's legacy. And if this deep dive showed you something you needed to see about grief or loss or the necessary rejection of false hope, well, we encourage you to continue to explore those difficult truths.
We thank you for joining us as we explored this foundational text of the 20th century and the deep wounds that created it.
And we'll leave you with one final thought. Something to mull over that builds on Hemingway's relentless commitment to stripping away illusion.
In our modern culture, whenever someone tells you to find meaning in suffering, to look for the hidden lesson or the silver lining that makes the trauma worthwhile.
Remember that Hemingway struggled 47 times to refuse that exact impulse? He looked at the catastrophic end of life and saw only the end of life. No purpose, no plan, just cessation.
So we challenge you to consider this. What is the one truth you have learned through hard experience or grief that the world still actively tries to lie to you about?
We challenge you to hold on to that difficult, unvarnished truth, however lonely it might feel.
Until next time.